At 82, Martin Scorsese has nothing left to prove and nothing left to lose. After a lifetime of redefining cinema, the man behind Taxi Driver, Goodfellas, and The Irishman finally breaks his silence. For decades, Scorsese stayed out of Hollywood politics. He let his films speak for him, portraits of greed, faith, guilt, and betrayal. But behind that silence was a list. 5 names. 5 people who, in his words, represent everything that killed the soul of cinema. They worship fame, he once said, but fame's the cheapest god there is. Insiders claim he wrote that list in a leather notebook years ago, during the making of Silence. Each name, they say, marks a moment of disappointment, a handshake that went wrong, a talent wasted, a truth twisted. Now, at 82, Scorsese doesn't care who gets offended. He calls it not revenge, but remembrance. Let's begin. Number 5. Number 5. Nicolas Cage. There was a time Martin Scorsese admired Nicolas Cage. They shared the same fire, unpredictable, dangerous, alive. When they worked together on Bringing Out the Dead in 1999, Scorsese saw in Cage the kind of madness that once made De Niro a legend. But something changed. Insiders say that during production, Cage's obsession with method acting began to spiral. He demanded more takes, more chaos, more truth. One night, after an exhausting 16-hour shoot, Cage refused to leave set, muttering, "You want reality, Marty? Then film me breaking." Scorsese, exhausted, stared at him and replied, "You're supposed to play the man who's lost it, not become him." That was the moment respect turned to worry, and later, to resentment. After the film's release, Cage publicly blamed its box office failure on Scorsese's slow direction and outdated tone. For Scorsese, that betrayal cut deep. He'd fought to get the film financed for Cage, believing it could revive his career. "You don't throw dirt at the man who fought for you," he told a friend. "That's not art. That's ego." Years later, when asked about Cage's career, Scorsese simply said, "He traded craft for chaos. And chaos always wins, just not the way you think." In private, he compared Cage to a broken mirror, once beautiful, now only reflecting fragments. To Scorsese, Nicolas Cage became a symbol of what happens when talent stops serving story and starts serving hunger. "The role doesn't destroy the actor," he once said. "The actor destroys the role when he stops caring." And that's why Cage was the first name on the list. Number 4. Mark Wahlberg. When Martin Scorsese cast Mark Wahlberg in The Departed, everyone thought it was a masterstroke. Wahlberg, the street-tough kid from Boston, was perfect for the role. And he delivered. The performance earned him an Oscar nomination. But behind the camera, things weren't so perfect. According to crew members, Wahlberg often showed up late, questioned Scorsese's direction, and even argued about lines that didn't fit his vibe. "I know these streets better than your script," he once told Marty half-jokingly. Scorsese didn't laugh. What really broke the trust came after the film's success. While promoting The Departed, Wahlberg publicly suggested that he had directed himself, claiming Scorsese mostly let him run free. Insiders say Scorsese heard that quote during a dinner in New York. He quietly put his glass down and said, "That's the problem with actors who think they're directors. They start believing their improvisations are divine." From then on, Scorsese never mentioned Wahlberg's name again. When asked in an interview if he'd work with him again, he smiled thinly. "You don't invite noise back into harmony." Years later, when Wahlberg expressed regret for turning down The Fighter under Scorsese's early interest, The legendary director declined to respond. To him, the damage was already done. "Respect isn't about saying thank you," Scorsese once said. "It's about not rewriting history when it goes your way." Mark Wahlberg remains one of the few actors Scorsese admits he still watches on screen. Not out of admiration, but curiosity. "I keep wondering," he said, "if he ever found the humility he lost in that edit room." Number 3. Jared Harris. For years, Martin Scorsese admired Jared Harris, a classically trained actor, thoughtful, intense, unpredictable in all the right ways. He once called him a man who understands silence. But that admiration died quietly. It began during pre-production for a long-planned Scorsese project, a period drama that never got made. Harris had been in talks for the lead, and Scorsese personally pushed the studio to trust him. But weeks before shooting, Harris abruptly walked away, signing instead with another director for more money and less substance. To the studio, it was business. To Scorsese, it was betrayal. "If you can sell your soul that cheap," he told a producer, "you never believed in it to begin with." When reporters later asked Harris about leaving the project, he shrugged it off, saying he wanted to work with directors who take bigger risks. That quote reached Scorsese. "Bigger risks?" he repeated. "I've risked everything, except my word." From that day, he refused to mention Harris in interviews. But his disappointment wasn't just personal. It was philosophical. Harris had reminded him of something he hated about modern actors: the ones who mistake restlessness for evolution. "They want to reinvent themselves every 6 months," he said. "They call it growth. I call it running away." Years later, after Harris's acclaimed role in Chernobyl, someone asked Scorsese if he'd ever work with him again. He paused, then said quietly, "Talent isn't rare. Loyalty is." To Scorsese, Jared Harris was a lesson. A reminder that in a business built on illusion, the only thing real is whether you keep your word when no one's watching. Number 2. Leonardo DiCaprio. For 2 decades, Leonardo DiCaprio was more than an actor to Martin Scorsese. He was a muse, a son, a reflection of what Scorsese once saw in De Niro. Raw, hungry, fearless. Together, they made history. Gangs of New York, The Aviator, The Departed, The Wolf of Wall Street. But behind the brilliance, cracks began to show. It started during The Wolf of Wall Street. Scorsese wanted it to be a cautionary tale about greed. DiCaprio wanted it to be chaos. Wild, unfiltered, loud. According to editors, Marty cut out nearly 45 minutes of improvised scenes where Leo pushed the excess too far. "It's supposed to disgust them," Scorsese said, "not make them cheer." DiCaprio disagreed. He fought for those scenes, believing they made the film iconic. The final cut became a masterpiece, but one that Scorsese felt misunderstood. "People loved the monster," he said later. "They stopped seeing the message." Their relationship cooled. Insiders say Scorsese felt Leo was drifting towards spectacle, more celebrity than artist. "He started playing characters who shouted," Marty told a close friend, "and forgot how to whisper." Years later, during the making of Killers of the Flower Moon, tension resurfaced. DiCaprio wanted rewrites, improvisation, constant changes. Scorsese, patient but firm, finally said, "You don't have to reinvent the script, Leo. You just have to believe it." That was the last argument they ever had. Since then, they've kept it civil, even affectionate in public. But to those who know him, Scorsese's disappointment runs deep. "I love the man," he admitted once, "but sometimes love turns into distance, not because you stop caring, but because you finally understand what you can't fix. And that's why Leonardo DiCaprio, the golden boy of Scorsese's late career, stands second on a list written not in anger, but in heartbreak. Number 1. Harvey Weinstein. For Martin Scorsese, Harvey Weinstein was never just a producer. He was a necessary evil. Back in the 1990s, when Miramax ruled independent cinema, Weinstein was the man everyone feared and needed. He financed art. He controlled awards. He played God. Scorsese worked with him on Gangs of New York, a dream project that quickly turned into a nightmare. Weinstein demanded cuts, rewrites, reshoots. He wanted more blood, more romance, more box office. "You're making a painting," he told Marty. "I need a poster." The final version, though still powerful, wasn't the film Scorsese envisioned. When it lost at the Oscars, Weinstein reportedly blamed Scorsese for being too precious with art. That was the moment Marty swore he'd never work with him again. Years later, when the truth about Weinstein's abuses came to light, Scorsese stayed silent for months. Then, in a rare interview, he finally said, "I knew he was cruel. I didn't know how deep it went. That's my shame." Insiders recall him pacing the floor of his editing suite the night the news broke. "We all knew his power," he told a friend, "and we all pretended not to see the price." For Scorsese, Weinstein represented everything he fought against his whole life. Greed without soul, control without compassion, power without conscience. "Cinema was supposed to save us," he said, "but men like him turned it into a weapon." And so, Harvey Weinstein sits at the top of Scorsese's list, not as a rival, but as a warning carved in guilt. Because in his own words, the devil doesn't show up in the story, he funds it. For decades, people said Martin Scorsese was obsessed with sin, guilt, betrayal, redemption. But what few understood was that those weren't just themes in his films. They were confessions. In a quiet interview at his New York apartment, a journalist finally asked him the question everyone avoided. "Do you really hate those people?" Scorsese leaned back, eyes fixed on the city lights below, and shook his head. "No, I don't hate them. I hate what this town turns people into." Then he reached for a small leather-bound notebook on his desk, old, worn, with 5 names inside. The same names he'd carried for years. Underneath them, a single line written in faded ink. "They remind me of what I could have become." That was the twist. The list wasn't about revenge. It was about fear. A mirror he kept to remind himself how close he'd come to losing his soul in the noise, the money, the applause. "The real villain," he whispered, "was never them. It was the silence that let them win." And with that, the room fell quiet, like the final frame of a film that refuses to fade to black. At 82, Martin Scorsese is no longer chasing perfection, only peace. The noise of Hollywood no longer tempts him. He spends his mornings editing in silence, his afternoons walking the streets of New York, watching faces he'll never film. When asked about the list, he smiles faintly. "It's not about who I despise," he says. "It's about what I've learned to forgive." The 5 names, Cage, Wahlberg, Harris, DiCaprio, Weinstein, have become more than memories. They're warnings carved into time. Lessons about pride, greed, weakness, and the price of forgetting why you started. "I used to think movies were about power," he told a young director once. "Now I know they're about mercy. The mercy you give and the mercy you beg for." There's no anger left in him. Only gratitude. For the pain? For the lessons? For the films that kept him human? As the sun sets over Manhattan, Scorsese looks out his window and whispers the same words he once wrote in that faded notebook. Cinema didn't save me. It just showed me who I was. And maybe, in the end, that was salvation enough.